Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about our top 10 Dynasty IDP players at risk due to the 2025 NFL Draft.
Hike!
In this episode, Joe and I came up with a consensus top 10 Dynasty IDP players that, depending on what these teams do in the draft, could alter their Dynasty value. So, Joe, who do we have, at number one?
At the number one spot, we got defensive end Jaelan Phillips with the Miami Dolphins. And, honestly, Steve, if they go ahead and draft one defensive end, I'd be very concerned. I mean, you're talking about a guy who's played a total of 12 games over the last 2 seasons. Now, he has shown flashes and abilities. His previous 2 years, he had 8.5 sacks and 7 sacks. But they do have Bradley Chubb, another guy that's often injured, drafted Chop Robinson. So he's a young and up-and-coming player on the defensive end as well. So if they add in another one, I'd be very concerned with Jaelan Phillips. And, not to mention he's playing on his 5th-year option, and will he be a Miami Dolphin after this season?
Yeah, you got to think about this. The Miami Dolphins went ahead and drafted Chop Robinson last year. Chop Robinson was somewhat of a raw prospect where, he used – he had what's his move? His move was the chop move, and he utilized his speed on the edge. And I think he outperformed what I thought you and I both thought as far as expectations for his rookie year. So you already have got him in the fold, and you also have got Bradley Chubb. He's coming back from an ACL. But you're talking about a possible rotation. So how many snaps is Jaelan Phillips going to get to begin with? And if the Miami Dolphins feel that they have to address that position in the draft, let's say they draft a guy like Mike Green in the first round. Like you said, I'm extremely concerned for Phillips. He's dealt with injuries his whole career. He'll be a free agent next year. He has talent, but it was definitely his dynasty value already took a tumble quite a bit just based on his dependability. And we know, Joe, in your opinion, and it's something you always say, the best, what is it?
The best ability is availability.
Steve. There it is. Thank you. So I was tripping over my words here. So I think Phillips at number one, he's definitely that one at risk the most, I think.
Yeah, definitely, especially just because he's a name and somebody that's showed some promise early on, and people had he had buzz on him. A lot of people liked him, expected big things out of him, but he just can't stay healthy. And, pretty much the Dolphins have to draft an edge rusher because they can't keep trying to trust Jaelan Phillips and Bradley Chubb, and they continually just disappoint them and get injured. And then it leaves Chop Robinson as the only guy, and he's going to need some help.
So for number 2, we're going to be talking about a player who I kind of had to push my way in and had to convince you that he was at risk as high as was consensus. You kind of, as a result, by default, you kind of let me have my way here. So that's going to be number 2, defensive tackle Christian Barmore of the New England Patriots. Just heard word recently that the Patriots are very concerned about the future of Barmore because the reality is he was shut down last season due to blood clots. And we really don't know what the story is with Barmore. He's a very talented player, coming out of Alabama. I think he was one of the more promising interior defensive linemen. I think you would think so as well. And you're kind of holding on hope. But my thinking is, Patriots have kind of revitalized their roster, have done a lot of, shuffling pieces around, add a lot of free agents. If they draft, this draft is very deep in defense in general, but also in the defensive line. So if they were to draft an interior defensive lineman, I'd be very concerned about what that could mean. Do they feel that Barmore could ever play again? He's one of the – I know you want him. I would tell you go trade for him right now because if I'm a Barmore owner, I'm like, I don't know. Do I just take what I can get? Or do I wait and hope that he comes back? Because if he does come back, he'll be great. He's probably one of the most riskiest players out there in fantasy football, in my opinion, right now.
Yeah, he definitely is risky, but the reward is definitely there if he does come back and play and is okay from these blood clots. I guess, that's the part I just don't know. Like, I don't know how likely it is for him to continue to have this blood clot issue, or if it's just something that was able to get rectified, last season and he would be okay. I honestly just really don't know, but I would fully expect the New England Patriots to take, an interior defensive lineman in this draft. It's very deep at that position. They do need to get younger, and honestly, they do need a backup and a backup plan just in case Barmore isn't right. But even if they do, I wouldn't really be scared about how that affects Barmore this year. I think the blood clots and his health affect him more than anything that the Patriots could actually do.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. All right, Joe, so who do we got from number 3?
Yeah, number 3, we've got linebacker Matt Milano with the Buffalo Bills. Kind of a common theme here with the first 3 guys, Steve. We got a lot of guys that are injured and haven't played a lot of football the last couple of years. He fits the bill. He's only played 9 games. And I honestly would fully expect the Bills to take a linebacker and just have a guy just in case. I mean, I know they like Dorian Williams, who got some playing time and showed out, played pretty well in the absence of Matt Milano as well. But you can always use additional depth there.
Well, if you look at their linebacker position, they've been absolutely gutted over the past few seasons. I mean, even you might have to remind me of the name, but they even brought a linebacker out of retirement in the playoffs. That was it 2 years ago?
Klein.
Yeah, AJ Klein. Yeah, they brought him back because they were so desperate that they needed somebody, and they didn't have anybody. So they were a little bit more healthy this past season. But to me, when you look at Matt Milano, it's not a good sign that he basically is getting the Von Miller treatment, which essentially he took a pay cut. So
yep.
Bills basically are saying, hey, you're not up to snuff. Now, he can get it back in incentives, but that's the same thing that Von did, and then Von was no more for the Bills. So Matt Milano has been a Bills whole career. I think he's beloved in Buffalo. But the days where he was really – he never really was a dominant IDP linebacker, but he was in that linebacker 2 conversation. I think he's at considerable risk, especially if they draft a linebacker. Maybe they use him on specialized downs, or maybe they try to save him for the playoffs. I don't know. I just that would be concerning to me.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And, like I said, I think it's absolutely a move that they would probably make. And I think they need a bit of you saw them even last year. They're starting to try to do a bit of a youth movement on the defense. And, Matt Milano's not getting any younger. They got, they have Bernard, they have Dorian Williams, but honestly, they could definitely use another guy.
So for number 4, we're going to be talking about defensive tackle Daron Payne of the Washington Commanders. Washington Commanders released Jonathan Allen earlier, so you could argue that, hey, this seems like a great opportunity for Payne because he's not there and Darian Mathis isn't there. Well, they signed Javon Kinlaw. They drafted Jerzon Newton to be the future. And if you look at Daron Payne's contract, he does have 2 years left on his contract remaining, but next year they've got an out. The Washington Commanders do. His cap hit would be $28 million. His dead cap would be 11.2, unless they did a post, June 1st cut down the road, and they'd be able to save some money. So I think at the end of the day, if you look at Daron Payne, he's a guy who, ultimately, I think he's been probably – I would say he's been somewhat of a disappointment. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are when it comes to Payne, but at the end of the day, he had one career year, and that's when he got paid back in 2022. He had 11 and a half sacks. After that, the highest sack total he's had is 5. And, he's pretty much good for about mid-50 tackles. But that 1 year in 2022, he had 64 total tackles, 11 and a half sacks. I don't know. I don't really see it from the guy. I think he's overrated, to be honest with you. And with, if they were to draft a defensive tackle, because they do like to rotate their D tackles, I'd be very concerned about Payne.
Yeah, I think it definitely is worrisome if they go ahead and draft another defensive tackle for Daron Payne. And, you mentioned it. I mean, hey, he was highly motivated in the contract year, and kudos to him. He did what we like to say, and he balled out, and he absolutely cashed out. And, he's just been okay. He hasn't, met those expectations again. But, I mean, nevertheless, he got his money and got rewarded for that 1 year. And I wouldn't be surprised in the least bit. I mean, we keep mentioning the just the depth is at the defensive line position in the draft, and I would fully expect another team to take another one because obviously they got Jaelan Newton, but then they added some veteran depth, so I think they could use another young guy, and maybe we see next offseason they move on from Daron Payne similarly like they did Jonathan Allen this offseason.
All right, Joe. So who do we have for number 5?
At number 5, we got cornerback Jaire Alexander with the Green Bay Packers. And, honestly, even if the Packers don't draft a corner, I am just concerned about Jaire Alexander anyways, and his future with the Green Bay Packers. He's had his locker room issues. He's played in 7 total games in back-to-back seasons. Really just hasn't been the type of cornerback that he once was. And, they're moving Keshawn Nixon to the outside, signing Nate Hobbs to be, a nickel cornerback. But the one thing going for him is even, they don't have a lot of depth, but if they do go ahead and draft him, I just wonder if that gives them the freedom to, trade him. And then depending on where the team goes, what does that do to his value?
Well, he's been rumored to be on the trade block this whole time.
Right.
And honestly, my concern for him is that he just ends up getting released. And if he gets released, you could say, he gets signed somewhere else. Not so fast. That's not a guarantee that he gets signed, right? I mean, I think time and time again, I think you and I can be surprised that like a player is out there, like this guy hasn't signed yet. Like, how is he not signed? Or this player didn't end up signing. So just because he gets released doesn't mean he's going to find another team just like that. He's not the best locker room guy to begin with, and for the Packers wanting to move on from him. It doesn't honestly really bode well for his prospects, I feel like. I mean, there are some needy teams at corner. Maybe somebody does. I mean, take a dart throw and get him. But based on everything we're hearing about Jaire Alexander right now, I think he's definitely at risk.
Yeah, he is for sure. And I do think he would sign with a team, but even that's risky, and it could be late in the process. And I think it could, if he gets released, it could take him a while to sign, and probably, maybe he's one of those late training camp additions or guy that, towards the preseason, he gets added to a team.
So for number 6, we're going to be talking about linebacker Tremaine Edmunds of the Chicago Bears. Joe, to me, he's a very risky player. Right now, he's got 2 years left remaining on his contract. He signed that whopping 4-year, $72 million contract a few years back. The Bears have a potential out next season. 17.437 is his cap hit, and his dead cap is 2.437. I think he's good as gone after this season. And honestly, it's crazy. He's played so many years in the NFL, but he's still pretty young. He's only 26 years old. But if you look at what he did in Buffalo, honestly, his numbers have just kind of slowly regressed over time. He's never really elevated to that guy that we thought he could be. At least as a Bills fan, I know there was a lot of excitement around him. I mean, and honestly, if you even look at inside linebackers, a lot of them that get drafted in the first round, there hasn't been a lot of success. Outside guys like Luke Kuechly, a lot of them have been absolute misses. I think the NFL is really having a hard time finding how to utilize these guys, especially when they're drafted so high. But that's a whole different topic for another day. But I think when it comes to Tremaine Edmunds, I think he's good as gone next year. So if they were to draft a linebacker, this organization has no allegiance to him. This is, even though, Poles, I guess, I think he was at the time. I'm actually, I don't, was he the GM at the time? Definitely a different head coach, obviously, in Ben Johnson. I can't remember if Poles was the GM. But even so, Eberflus, I think at the time, was the coach, and he was the one who wanted to bring him in. So his defense and his philosophy, Ben Johnson's on the offensive side, he's going to defer to the defensive coordinator. But the whole thoughts of how he was going to help this team is, I wouldn't say vanished, but vanished.
Yeah. I can't remember if Poles was there or not, because I don't know if he was there for the start of Eberflus or like after Eberflus's first year took over, he was the GM. But
I think it was a year after Eberflus he
that's
came in.
that's kind of what I was thinking. That's what kind of
Yeah.
how I remembered it. But nevertheless, I mean, like you said, they changed coaches. Eberflus is the one that had the vision for him. And honestly, I thought, being that Eberflus kind of likes to play that zone style a bit like the Bills, I thought Tremaine Edmunds was going to be a better fit. But you're not wrong. He's been disappointing, and everyone thought he was like the next, young and up and coming linebacker. And you mentioned it. He came in the league so young and just hasn't quite developed. And I think that's just kind of part of the way that the NFL is working. Teams don't seem to value the linebacker position as much anymore, and they're taking them off the field and just going with more DBs. So I think part of it is why these guys just aren't panning out. Is just the way that the NFL is transitioning. But maybe if teams start running the ball more, we'll see that kind of change for the linebacker position.
Well, and the thing too is that he was, when you think about Tremaine Edmunds, he's a great cover linebacker, but that's not going to give you stats. You want a linebacker who's down the hill who's going to give you tackles. That's not him.
Yeah, well, that's why they have TJ Edwards.
That's right. So how about number 7, Joe? Who do we got there?
Yeah, number 7, we got safety Minkah Fitzpatrick with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, he's at risk. I mean, he's coming off of a disappointing year last year. Although, I mean, he's been kind of up and down the last few years. He was more disappointing the year before, only playing 10 games with the 64 tackles. But, he did get 96 total tackles, 62 solo. But he hasn't been putting up the interception numbers like he once was. I think that's where the disappointing factor is for him. And I'd be nervous if they, go ahead and get another ball hawking guy, bring in a guy like Malachi Starks or even Nick Emenwari. If they sign one of those guys, I'd be really concerned that that's the succession plan for Minkah Fitzpatrick, and his value could definitely be impacted.
Yeah, what probably saves Minkah Fitzpatrick as far as that goes is if they have not addressed the quarterback position, they may have to draft a Jackson Dart or something in the first round, so they don't have to worry about it. But we are talking about at risk. And when you look at Minkah Fitzpatrick, he's been primarily a name up until this point, at least most recently. When he first went to Pittsburgh, he had a pretty huge impact. But ever since then, he just hasn't been able to be consistent. And like you said, because he's more of that ball hawking type safety, he's not going to get as many tackle numbers. I mean, you saw the amount of tackles that Deshaun Elliott had in Pittsburgh. So I think when it comes down to it, it doesn't really bode well for Minkah Fitzpatrick going forward, which we felt he was at risk.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look at the first 4 years he was with Pittsburgh. I mean, he had 5 interceptions. Next year, 4 interceptions, then 2, and then 2022 he had 6, and then he's had 1 total interception over the last 2 years. It's just not exactly Minkah Fitzpatrick like.
Nope. And for number 8, we're going to be talking about linebacker Devin Lloyd, a guy who honestly has been, I think, somewhat of a disappointment in Jacksonville. We're going to find out how they feel about him, especially when you're talking about a new head coach and a new general manager. So they don't have any allegiance to Devin Lloyd, and they got to decide whether or not they're going to accept the 5th-year option. I don't know about you, Joe, but I kind of doubt it. I don't think that – I mean, Jaguars don't have a lot of cap space tied into a lot of players, so maybe they will decide to do it, but that's a lot of money that they'd have to pay for the franchise tag number amount for an inside linebacker if they go ahead and accept that 5th-year option. So I don't think Devin Lloyd – that would mean that Devin Lloyd's in a contract year. And, again, a guy who, they traded up in the first round to get him, and he just has been okay. All right, he's had, disappointing at 113 tackles this past season, 127 the year before that, 115, the year before that. So, a guy who I think at the end of the day has been a disappointment, and I know you feel the same.
Yeah, he definitely has been disappointing. A lot of buzz was around him in his draft year. Thought he was going to be better. Honestly, I thought even another guy they drafted, Chad Muma, I thought he was also going to be a lot better. He was highly touted and known as a cover guy, but we're talking about Devin Lloyd, so I agree he does be on the list. And given that, I do think it would be tough if they accept the 5th-year option. Not sure that they will, and just given the way that the NFL teams just don't seem to value the linebacker position either, I really don't see that happening. So. Yeah, could be an interesting shakeup of what Jacksonville does with their linebacker room. And I guess I'd fully anticipate them taking somebody.
Well, and that's what, too, when it comes to linebacker, I think you and I both feel is almost the scariest of the defensive position because all of a sudden they can just fall off a cliff. Just because they become a free agent doesn't mean that somebody's going to assign them and then they're going to get all these snaps. That's the concerning part.
Yeah, I mean, just look, Shaq Leonard was great until released and then never really picked it back up. Devin White was great with the Buccaneers for a while. He gets released from the Bucs, Eagles tried him out, didn't work out, and now he's forgotten. So linebackers, it does happen quick, and it's one lesson we've learned in IDP is sign these guys long term because you just never know when they're going to lose their value.
You and I got majorly burned on that. Majorly burned.
Yeah.
So how about number 9? Who do we got there?
Yeah, number 9, we got Jermaine Johnson with the New York Jets, coming off of a disappointing season where he only played 2 games. And honestly, I could definitely, given again defensive end, edge rushers really deep in this draft class. There's a lot of names. I could definitely see the Jets adding somebody, and if they do, I mean, I think Jermaine Johnson's future with the Jets is in question, and they could be looking to who they're going to pair Will McDonald with going forward.
Yeah, I mean, reports seem to indicate that Jermaine Johnson is going to be the Jets are going to accept his 5th-year option, but he did tear his Achilles.
Right.
So when you talk about an edge rusher, that might be even worse than the ACL because they're in that down position and they have to have that get off right. Once the snap hits to go, and they've got Will McDonald on the other side. But if they bring another edge rusher in, it's not like they have that many edge rushers to begin with. He would definitely be somewhat of a rotation, but that's where we think it's kind of concerning because how does he come back from this Achilles injury? That's a considerable injury, and again, this is we've been talking about some players here that new head coach, new general manager, right? So yeah. Robert Saleh isn't there. He's no more, and the general manager is no more. You're talking about a completely new staff here. So they don't have any allegiance to Jermaine Johnson. Now, if they're going to accept the 5th-year option for him based on the reports that I'm seeing, that's a positive development for him. But time will tell.
Yeah, that's interesting that they would accept it, just not knowing how he's going to come back from an injury like that. And like you said, Achilles is really tough to come back from, and especially that first year. Your players just don't seem to be right. Honestly, one of the only guys I've seen like really just not seem to affect him is like Emmanuel Sanders. But outside of that, I mean, we've even seen, the quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, just not looking the same right away at the start of the season when they ruptured their Achilles. And it just seems like a long road back. And you mentioned it for edge rushers and that explosiveness that matters. He definitely, could be struggling as he battles back from that.
So in our last one, number 10, we're kind of going on a limb on this one. It's going to be defensive tackle Christian Wilkins. He's a guy who, before this season, while he was in Miami, you and I both would say that he was a tier 1 defensive tackle. Fortunately, he had that foot injury that shortened his season last year. I believe only played in 5 games. So we didn't really see a lot of him. Now you got Pete Carroll coming in as the head coach. He has a certain defensive philosophy that he's used during his time in Seattle with a new general manager as well. So it'll be really interesting to see what the Raiders do. Do they, bring any other defensive talent into that defensive line? Is it just going to be Wilkins and Max Crosby? Is it just going to be those 2 guys? So is he going to face those double teams? How are they going to tend to use Wilkins? How does he come back with that foot injury? Sometimes when players have these type of injuries, they almost become this like forgotten guy. Because, again, he was talked about. He was a huge free agent. It was a huge splash when the Raiders decided to sign him last year. So it's kind of more so of an unknown because we just don't. It's like he's forgotten news. So does he stay? Again, we talk about this. There are some where basically we're talking about their values absolutely plummet. It's not to say that Christian Wilkins is going to plummet, but we viewed him as a tier 1 guy. A guy who was in the likes of a Quinnen Williams, a guy like Jeffrey Simmons. We viewed him in the same category. Maybe he's not in that category anymore. We saw what he was able to do in Miami. Can he continue to do that in Las Vegas? We didn't see it in his first year. He had that injury in his second year. Does he go back to the player that we knew in Miami, or is he now a tier 2 or tier 3 player? He's still going to be valuable, I think we both believe, but is he that elite guy still? We don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a chance he could. I mean, depending on how he comes back from this foot injury, but if they add some more depth to that defensive line, I think we could see him kind of return to the Christian Wilkins that we know. It'll be interesting. I think for the most part he played 3-4 when he was with the Dolphins. Obviously, Pete Carroll plays a 4-3 defense. Be interesting to see how he and Adam Butler kind of play in the interior defense of that Las Vegas Raider line. But outside of those two guys, they really don't have a lot of depth. So I would fully anticipate them drafting a defensive tackle. I don't know how badly that hurts Wilkins' value this year.
Well, let's not forget, though, his true value when it came to IDP was not, and he's a unique one, it's not necessarily because of his sack numbers, it's because of his tackle numbers, right? Like back in the day, he had almost 100 total tackles in 2022. Now, in his final year in Miami, he did have 9 sacks, but prior to that, his highest sack total was 4.5. So he's not necessarily known for that, and Max Crosby plays a lot of snaps, and Matt Crosby gets a ton of tackles. So it's like only one of them can get the solo unless they have a ton of assisted tackles. So, Christian Wilkins has not been known to get a ton of sacks besides that 1 year. So he's going to have to rely on that tackle floor. So, that to me is a little bit concerning.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder with the 4-3 front if that helps him try to not get double teamed so much, and maybe does that free him up to be able to get additional tackles?
It's possible. I think we'd have to look at his pressure rate and his pressures over the years. I don't have that on hand. But based on in my watching with him, I think he's not stiff. I mean, I think he definitely has the ability to create havoc in the back, and really cause pressure on the quarterback. So not to say he can't do that. And it may benefit him, honestly, in the 4-3. You're not wrong. It's just kind of one of those things where he's at – I think you and I talked about him, felt like he was a player who's at risk because he may no longer be elite anymore. Maybe he's in that tier 2 or tier 3. You got to remember, too, he's getting there up in age. He is 30 years old this season. So – I mean, he is a little bit, it's hard to believe. I would think it's actually a little older than I thought he would be, but he's 30 years old. Defensive tackles can play late in their career. We see Calais Campbell. He's still doing it, although he hasn't signed. So, where are we going, Christian Wilkins? It should be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think there's a chance that he just isn't that top tier defensive tackle anymore, but I still think even if he's the, tier below, I mean, his value definitely, is taking a hit if he's getting dropped a tier.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about the top 10 Dynasty IDP players that, in our view, are at risk due to the 2025 NFL Draft. Like we talked about in these other episodes, we just did the offense one if you haven't checked that out. But hey, if you like to risk it to get the biscuit, go for it. You could try to acquire these players. I would say any of these players are probably going to be up for grabs. You could probably get them for somewhat of a discount because all of them have their question marks. And if these teams don't end up addressing these positions, you might have a great opportunity on your hands. If not, hey, just keep them on your radar, right, Joe? I mean, because at the end of the day, these are players that we are monitoring to see what's going to happen going forward.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, situations are worth monitoring, but as we keep saying, and we said it in the last video, I mean, if you feel moved and you want to try to buy low on one of these guys, have at it, but it is risky.
That it is. And that does it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.